Hi, I'm Leora, a 43-year-old mom to my daughter Marigold, who just turned 15 this year. Marigold has been working really hard in school lately, aiming to get into a good middle school in a couple of years. These days, life has felt pretty calm, which is a nice change, especially after the struggles I went through about 10 years ago. Back then, I was working my first job as a tax accountant, and I met Soren, who was in charge of accounting at the same company. I was 29, and he was 31 when we decided to get married. Soren was living with his mother since his father had passed away a few years earlier. Before we got married, I asked him if we would be living with his mother. Soren assured me, no, she wants to live comfortably on her own. I felt relieved because I didn't really want to live with my mother-in-law. I was fine with living nearby in case she needed help, but I valued having our own space and privacy. Things seemed to be going smoothly until about a month after our wedding, when my mother-in-law started coming over to our place more and more often. It all began innocently enough with her offering to bring over some crab from a relative. She said, "I'll bring it over, so we can have a crab dinner together tonight." She was so enthusiastic that it was hard to say no. She also loved to drink, so she asked us to have whiskey, wine, and beer ready for her. I thought it was just a one-time thing, a simple family dinner, but I was wrong. That night, she ate and drank for over 3 hours, eventually passing out on our couch. When she finally went home, I thought that would be the end of it, but the next morning, she started calling again, looking for reasons to drop by. Her visits quickly became frequent, and she got bolder each time. For instance, she would call in the evening and ask, "Leora, have you decided on dinner yet?" If I said I was just about to start cooking, she'd say, "Well, I just got home from spending the day out with friends, and I'm starving. Can I come over for dinners?" I would try to tell her that I'd only bought enough for 2, but she'd insist, "No problem. I don't eat that much. Just share a bit with me." From then on, she would show up nearly every evening, always seeming to know exactly when I was starting to cook. She'd stay late, sometimes even spending the night. This became a regular thing, and I was losing my patience. I eventually asked Soren if he could talk to her and ask her to give us a bit more space. He brushed it off, saying, "She just wants to get along with you. Isn't that a good thing?" I reminded him that she'd promised to respect our privacy, and he agreed to speak to her politely. But nothing changed. The calls kept coming, and her visits continued. I finally realized that if I didn't set some boundaries, she would just keep taking advantage. Soren wasn't much help, so I decided to handle it myself. One day, when she called to ask if she could come over for dinner again, I said, "Actually, that won't work today. Soren and I were planning to come over to your place instead." She hesitated and said, "That's no good. Even if you come over, I won't be able to serve you anything special." I replied, "Oh, we don't mind at all. It would be nice to have a meal that you cooked." She then snapped back, "You're asking me to cook for you? Do you think that's fair?" I stood firm and replied, "Please, don't come over today." And so I finally set some limits. After that, things became a bit more manageable, and eventually, she stopped coming over unannounced. Looking back, I'm proud of myself for standing up for the peace in our home. I said, "Remember how we agreed to keep a respectful distance while maintaining a good relationship? In that case, please refrain from coming to our house from now on as well." I worried I might have been too direct, but I knew that if I didn't make my point clear, her intrusiveness would only get worse. After I set that boundary, my mother-in-law stayed away for a while, and life settled down. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. When I reached my 9th month, I took maternity leave and moved back to my parents' house to prepare for the baby. With my mom's help, I was able to relax and enjoy those last few weeks of peace. Then, a week before my due date, I delivered a healthy baby girl. We named her Marigold. The day after Marigold was born, my mother-in-law showed up at the hospital, surprising me with a list of 10 baby names she had carefully written out. "I've come up with some good names for the baby," she said proudly, handing me the list. "Mom, thank you for thinking of us, but we've already chosen her name," I replied gently, hoping she would understand. Soren, who was there with us, seemed caught off guard and asked, "Why would you pick a name without consulting me? This is my granddaughter too. I should have a say in naming her." I stayed firm and said, "Please stop. We've already decided. The paperwork hasn't been filed yet, but we're set on her name." My mother-in-law wouldn't let it go. "There's still time to change it. Just say the word, and I'll handle it." At that moment, my mother, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped in. She said in a calm but firm voice, "Marigold is Soren and Leora's child. It's their right to name her. Grandparents don't get to decide these things." "But I was so looking forward to helping choose her name," my mother-in-law argued, sounding hurt. Understanding where she was coming from but staying firm, my mom replied, "Soren and Leora have been looking forward to this more than anyone else. As a parent yourself, you should understand." Clearly taken aback, my mother-in-law glared at my mom before leaving the room. Soren quickly followed her to calm her down. Turning to my mom, I thanked her. "Thanks for standing up for us. I feel so much better now that this is finally clear." "I know dealing with her must be tough," my mom replied gently. "But at least you'll get to rest here for a month, right?" "Yes, I'm planning to stay for about a month to fully recover," I assured her. "Good. Make sure you get plenty of rest," she said with a smile. But on the day I was supposed to leave the hospital, Soren and my mother-in-law arrived to pick me up. She announced with a bright smile, "Everything's ready to welcome Marigold. Let's go home, Leora." "Wait a minute," I replied, surprised. "I thought I'd mentioned that I was planning to recover at my parents' house for the first month." Looking somewhat irritated, she asked, "Is your parents' place really the best environment for you and Marigold right now? Soren has been eagerly waiting for you both to come home." My mother stepped in and said, "Leora is still recovering, and I'm here to take good care of her and the baby. I live nearby, so she's in good hands. There's no rush." But my mother-in-law wouldn't let it go. "Now, Leora, hurry up and get ready. I'm not leaving until you're packed." Soren, who had been awkwardly silent, finally spoke up. "I want Leora and Marigold home too, but she's still recovering and needs help with the housework." He glanced at his mom, adding, "We'll manage," and Mom said she'd help us out for a while. But my mother-in-law didn't give up. She said, "Leora, you've already relied on your mother so much during the pregnancy. Don't you think it's selfish to burden her even more?" At that point, I felt stuck. My mom had told me not to worry, but I knew that if I insisted on staying with my parents, my mother-in-law might hold a grudge and make things even harder for us later. So, to avoid more tension, I decided to go back to my own home instead. However, I quickly realized I might have made the wrong choice. The very next day, my mother-in-law showed up as if she'd been waiting for her chance. "Marigold, Grandma's going to hold you now," she said, reaching for the baby. "Please don't wake her. She just fell asleep," I whispered, trying to keep the peace. "Oh, it's fine," she replied, brushing off my concerns as she cradled Marigold in her arms. That was only the beginning of the challenges to come. "I raised Soren, you know," my mother-in-law said proudly, as she lifted Marigold out of her crib. But as soon as she picked her up, Marigold began wailing loudly. No matter what my mother-in-law tried, the crying wouldn't stop. She sighed and muttered, "Isn't this child a bit high-strung? That's why I asked you not to wake her," I replied, gently but firmly. She huffed and said, "I came over to help, and now you're being harsh with me." I quickly took Marigold back, doing my best to calm her. Once she settled down, I said, "If you're here to help, maybe you could do some shopping and prepare meals. I'm really not able to go out yet." She frowned. "Cooking isn't really my thing," she replied. "I'd rather help with childcare." "I can handle Marigold," I told her. "But if you could manage the other chores, that would be a huge help." "Oh, Leora," she said with a chuckle, "do you plan to monopolize Marigold? I came here to take care of her while you do the housework. If that's the case, could you put her to sleep now?" I asked. My mother-in-law looked at Marigold, who was fussing again, and said, "Do you think she's hungry?" "I just fed her," I answered. "Then her diaper must be wet." "Go on and change it," she suggested. "I already did," I replied, starting to feel frustrated. She shrugged. "Well, if that's the case, there's nothing more I can do," she said, giving up. "I'll come check on you again tomorrow." And with that, she left. As she walked out, I muttered to myself, "Please don't come back. Ever." But that wish didn't come true. From then on, she started visiting nearly every day. Instead of helping, she'd often wake Marigold up from her naps, leaving her fussy and in a bad mood. She would eat whatever meals I managed to prepare, then leave without so much as rinsing a dish. Soren, who I had hoped would support me, would just come home from work, smile at Marigold, and say, "She's so cute," without offering any real help. When I asked him to pitch in, he'd do a half-hearted job that left me with more work to clean up afterward. Exhausted and sleep-deprived, I was at my breaking point. About a month after Marigold was born, Soren actually got up early one morning and said, "I'll watch Marigold, so you can get some rest. You must be tired." "Are you sure?" I asked, grateful but a bit wary. "Will you be okay on your own?" "My mom's coming over soon, so it'll be fine," he reassured me. Hoping for the best, I went back to bed. About an hour later, though, I heard Marigold crying. I tried to ignore it, thinking Soren or my mother-in-law would soothe her. But as the cries grew louder, I couldn't stay in bed anymore. I got up and hurried to Marigold's room. Soren was nowhere in sight. My mother-in-law stood by the crib, looking irritated, while Marigold cried her heart out. "Where's Soren?" I asked, confused. "He left," she replied flatly. "He got a call from a friend or something." "And what are you doing?" I demanded. "Marigold won't stop crying," she complained. "Did you check her diaper?" "Are you asking me to do that?" she replied, annoyed. "It's been ages since I changed a diaper. Now that you're here, hurry up and take care of it." Feeling more frustrated with myself than anyone else, I quickly changed Marigold's diaper, and she started to calm down in my arms. Just as she drifted off, my mother-in-law said, "Oh, she's in a better mood now. Hand her over," and took Marigold from me. Resigned, I went to the kitchen to clean up the dishes that Soren and his mom had probably used. But before I could finish, I heard Marigold fussing again. My mother-in-law was desperately trying to soothe her, saying, "It's Grandma, Marigold. It's Grandma." But the more she rocked Marigold, the louder the baby cried. I tried to step in to calm Marigold, but then something shocking happened. My mother-in-law, clearly frustrated, looked at Marigold and snapped, "Why are you always crying? Your night crying is annoying too. Just shut up." And then, in a burst of anger, she actually smacked Marigold on the head. I gasped, horrified. "What are you doing? Stop it." I screamed. "What are you doing? Stop it." My mother-in-law looked at me defiantly and said, "I'm punishing her because she won't listen. Look, she's quiet now." But as I looked down at Marigold, her little body seemed limp, her arms and legs dangling. She looked like she had lost consciousness. I quickly grabbed Marigold from her arms, panicking. "What the hell are you trying to do? Kill her? If anything happens to Marigold, I won't forgive you," I shouted. Without waiting for her response, I immediately called for an ambulance. As the medics arrived and we rushed Marigold to the hospital, my mother-in-law finally seemed to realize how serious this was. She followed us in silence, but as we arrived, I overheard her talking to the nurse. "She fell out of the crib," she said. "Please help her." I was shocked. "Why are you lying? You hit her." I protested, but I knew this wasn't the time to argue. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor came out with an update. "Your daughter has shaken baby syndrome. She vomited and had a seizure afterward, which confirms it. Will she be okay? Has she regained consciousness?" I asked, terrified. The doctor nodded reassuringly. "Her brain activity looks normal, and she's in a restful sleep right now. If she continues to improve, you should be able to take her home today." "But just to clarify," he added, "you mentioned that she fell out of the crib?" "What?" I replied, shocked. "No, my mother-in-law hit her." The doctor's expression became serious. Shaken baby syndrome doesn't occur from simply falling out of a crib. It only happens when a baby's head is violently shaken or struck hard. My mother-in-law, suddenly defensive, tried to protest. "I did no such thing. She must have misunderstood." The doctor cut her off, his voice firm. "Shaken baby syndrome is not something to take lightly. You were very fortunate that this case was mild. In severe instances, it can lead to brain bleeding, vision impairment, and even death." Hitting or shaking a baby for any reason is unacceptable. She fell silent, realizing she couldn't talk her way out of this. But before I could say more, I was led to a small room, where I waited for what felt like hours. Eventually, 2 police officers arrived. They explained that this was considered an assault. I told them, I didn't do anything. My mother-in-law is the one who hit my daughter. We'll need to hear the full story at the station, one officer said. Would you come with us? I agreed, trying to stay calm. I asked the nurses to keep an eye on Marigold, and then went with the police. At the station, I explained everything that happened in detail, from the moment my mother-in-law had started interfering with Marigold's care to the terrifying incident that morning. All right, the officer said finally. You can go home for now. We'll need to interview your daughter's grandmother, so please let her know we'll be contacting her. I understand, I replied, feeling a mix of relief and worry. I thanked them, then rushed back to the hospital, desperate to check on Marigold. When I arrived, I found the doctor. Excuse me, where's my daughter? Asked, looking around anxiously. The doctor frowned and said, Your daughter was already taken home by her grandmother. What? I felt my heart drop. You're kidding, right? I hurried home, realizing along the way that I hadn't even told Soren. I called him, trying to explain, but he interrupted, his voice full of anger. What did you do? I heard you hit Marigold. How could you? What kind of mother does that? Wait, Soren. Please just let me explain, I said, my voice trembling. Save it, he replied coldly. I'm coming home. As I stood in the entryway, panic rising, I saw Soren waiting with a stern, almost accusing look. You've got some nerve coming back here, looking so unperturbed, he snapped. How can you face Marigold? Wait, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There's been a misunderstanding. I didn't do anything. Enough with the lies, he retorted, dismissing my words. My mother told me everything. You were taken in by the police, weren't you? That's because of your mother's lies. She's twisting the whole situation to blame me, I said, desperate for him to understand. But Soren's expression remained hardened. Then, from inside the house, I heard my mother-in-law's voice, cold and unwavering. There's no place for you here anymore. I clenched my fists, determined to reveal the truth. You might not believe anything I say right now, but the truth will come to light soon enough. Can I stay here until then? I asked, holding onto a shred of hope. Soren paused, a bit taken aback. What do you mean? The police will be coming by later. Let's clarify everything while they're here, I replied. At that moment, my mother-in-law hurriedly interjected, I think I'd better go home for today, and moved toward the door. Desperate to prevent her escape, I blocked her way. Just then, the doorbell rang, and the officers arrived. With everyone seated around the table, one of the officers spoke. We've heard the story from Marigold's mother, but it doesn't match what the grandmother told us. We'd like to hear her version of today's events once more. My mother-in-law launched into a shaky retelling, claiming that I had hit Marigold on the head, causing her collapse. But as she continued, her story became increasingly tangled and incoherent. She stammered, unable to answer the officer's questions, and finally broke down in tears. The officer's stern voice cut through the silence. Just to confirm, the one who harmed Marigold was not the mother, but the grandmother. Is that correct? My mother-in-law, unable to hold up her lies any longer, gave a defeated nod. With that, the suspicion against me was completely cleared. I looked at her, my voice steady. If you try to make this worse, I'll sue you for assault. She dropped to her knees, clinging to me, begging desperately. Anything but that, please. Resolutely, I shook off her pleading hands, and the officers led her away, her head hanging in shame. Soren, clearly shaken, tried to defend himself. Mom did it? She promised to help, but instead she hurt Marigold. He looked at me, filled with remorse. The worst part is, you didn't even check the facts before accusing me, I said, my voice cold. Did you really think I was that terrible of a mother? He looked down, guilt evident. No, I just didn't think my mom would do something like that. You thought I would, I replied, anger rising. Enough is enough. I've made my decision. I want a divorce. Hey, relax, he said, trying to calm me down. I refuse to get divorced. You're overreacting.
No, Soren.
I'm not overreacting. You doubted me and sided with your mother without a second thought. And as for you, you lack the commitment to be a husband or a father. Please gather your things and leave. I then made the decision to take legal action against my mother-in-law for assault. Though she only received a fine, I was able to secure enough child support and alimony from both of them to ensure Marigold and I would be taken care of. After severing ties with that toxic relationship, Marigold and I found peace. We've since moved on, creating a calm, stable life together, finally free from the turmoil they brought into our lives.